Brooks, let's kickstart this conversation by telling us a bit about yourself, what's your background, and how did you find yourself here?
Sure. Thanks everybody for being here and having me. Thanks Caleb and everybody. I'll give you a quick rundown of my background. Obviously, from my name and my accent, I'm American. I grew up in San Francisco, and when I graduated from university, I really didn't know what I wanted to do. And so I, on a whim, I backpacked from South Africa to Kenya in kind of taxis and boats and hitchhiking and all sorts of crazy things. But along that journey, I met a partner from McKinsey in South Africa, and he suggested that maybe what I should do is come and join McKinsey in South Africa, and so I did. And I thought it would be a year or 2 years, and that was 11 years ago. And so I stayed at McKinsey for 5.5 years. I worked in South Africa. I started the Nigeria office with some other people. And then I moved to Nairobi in 2013 to set up Roha with the idea of creating a platform or a company that could be used to launch other companies. There's so many opportunities across the continent, but it can be so difficult to pull all of the pieces together. The capital, the expertise, the people, the technology. And so the idea behind Roha is that we could systematically go after these opportunities and try to launch a bunch of new companies in Africa. And our first project is here in Ethiopia, Juniper Glass, which is a container glass company that we started, basically making beer bottles and soda bottles. And the basic story is today, Ethiopia imports something like 200 million empty bottles a year. We are going to be making about 200 million bottles in our factory in Debre Birhan. And so I started it, and then last year we sold a majority stake to Consol, which is a large South African glass company, and now we're in construction, and now we as Roha are looking for new projects and doing a bunch of other cool stuff here and across the region.
Amazing, and I'd love to know a little bit more about how you chose Ethiopia out of all the places you could have started with.
Good luck, maybe. I think that the Ethiopian story is very unique on the continent. I lived in South Africa and Nigeria and Kenya before Ethiopia. I've worked all over the continent, and I think that there is literally nowhere else in Africa, or probably the world, where you have kind of this particular mix of opportunity. Where you have 100 million people, you have a government that is broadly supportive of entrepreneurship and investment, where you have relatively minimal corruption, and where there's just so much potential for growth. Any one of those conditions exists somewhere else, but not all of them together. And so that really made Ethiopia a key target for us, and that's kind of how we ended up here. And then there are challenges here, but it's actually a pretty great place to be.
Amazing, and I mean I'd love to know two things. One, how you went about thinking about glass, and everybody has a glass on the table. It's a huge thing that we're importing to take on such a big challenge. Where did that come from? And then to hear a bit more around the challenges within Ethiopia. There are many. What have been some of your challenges?
So on glass, well, at Roha, our core thesis is around import substitution and some kind of other areas of latent demand. But what we're really looking to do is make markets more efficient and to identify areas where there should be a company, where there should be a solution, and for whatever reason there isn't today. And so glass, when I first came to Ethiopia as part of this adventure, which was in 2013, I just had a bunch of conversations with a lot of different people, and glass kept coming up actually as something that was a big problem for the breweries, a big problem for Coke, a huge import. And so we looked more and more into the data, realized that the imports were enormous, and realized that all of the raw materials are available locally: sand, soda ash, limestone or dolomite, broken glass. And so the conditions were really ripe to set up a company. It took a long time to come, it's a $70 million project, so it took a long time to find the funding and to find the right land and to find the right partners and kind of put all of the pieces together. But the kind of overarching thesis behind glass has been around since 2013. In terms of challenges, there's some challenges that are, I think, generic across anything that you do anywhere in the world, and I think that finding the right people and the right and finding enough money both to do something and to survive is always a challenge. I think it's especially difficult in Ethiopia because the capital markets are relatively tight and there's not a lot of capital running around, to kind of throw into a glass factory. In Ethiopia, the great involvement of the government in terms of encouraging entrepreneurship and investment is at times a double-edged sword, and so Ethiopia requires a very high degree of relationship and coordination with the government. We're very fortunate to be working in an area that is explicit government priority, import substitution and manufacturing with some exports. We are very fortunate to have found a town, Debre Birhan, where the local municipality is incredibly supportive and has been very helpful. But those things took time. And I think that it takes time to find the right relationships. It takes time to learn how things work. It takes time to move from idea or verbal agreement to something written on paper. And that time, especially as an entrepreneur, especially as a cash-strapped entrepreneur, can be really, really difficult in terms of survival.
That's so interesting. I like how you said 70 million as if it was a normal thing. I find that to be incredible. Could you tell us a little bit about how, as an entrepreneur, as someone starting up, you can have a vision this big? It's not a small vision. It's huge. Can you tell us how do you get to that place?
Well, it actually happened by accident. So in the beginning, I thought it was going to be 30 million, which is not like a small number, but it's significantly smaller than 70. But then, one of the things that was really important to me, and that's been key to the success of this, is to find experts, right? I studied.
Can you still hear?
I'm just gonna.
If you can still hear, we'll
yeah, we'll just keep going. But I could be doing crazy stuff up here and you guys wouldn't be able to tell. So I studied politics and economics in university. I worked in management consulting, which is a great way to learn, but I actually had no kind of real skills that were necessary to build this business. And so what was very clear from the beginning is that we needed to find a technical partner and technical advisors and people to guide us. And so that's something that we did immediately. And that's how they basically told me that all of my ideas and all of the models that I made were completely wrong, that there's no way I could do what I wanted to do. And so we had to, so then we increased the budget, and that's how the budget ended up at 75 million. Basically the way that we started this was I set out some very clear milestones. And so at first I just came, just me hustling, applying for my licenses, doing all these things with kind of money from friends and family. Just to get our license, and we got the license, and then we went around and tried to get the land, doing kind of some things so we had a real project. Once we had a real project, we had some land, we had identified some engineers, we had some advisors, we had kind of a real business plan. We were able to go out and raise a little bit more money, and we used that money to then kind of take it to the next step, which is when we were able to realize kind of get much more money. And I think that kind of the milestone and kind of step-by-step approach is really critical, because if you look at the high level, if you look at what we've done over the past few years, it looks like we've grown really quickly and we've kind of gone from 0 to 100 very fast. In reality, there were a lot of small steps along the way that were really critical, and without those small steps planned kind of in advance, there's no way we would have been able to go to where we are.
So start to finish, or start to where you are now, time frame, what does that look like?
We're just about 4 years in, actually. So we started around now, or October 2013. This is when we got our license. We worked then for kind of let's say a year and a half on putting together all the other pieces of the project, raising some more money. And then at that point, we had actually agreed with an investor to provide us with all the capital that we needed to build our factory. So then we worked with that investor for about 9 months before the investor admitted that they didn't really have the money. And that really set us back. And so, kind of all of a sudden, 2.5 years in, 3 years in, we were scrambling for money. We had spent all of the money basically that we had before in terms of developing, because we had thought that this investor, which is like a major publicly listed multinational company, we thought that they were going to come in. And so all of a sudden we found ourselves, kind of in September, October of 2015, with no investor to build the factory, and kind of very quickly depleting cash to even be able to kind of pay salaries, pay our engineers, pay our land lease, et cetera, et cetera. And so that was really tough. And I think that the fourth quarter of 2015 until the fourth quarter of 2016 were extraordinarily difficult. And then finally last year, console kind of came through and we were able to work everything out. But that period was pretty hairy for a while.
Amazing. And from speaking to people that I've been told that a particular question to ask you is around entrepreneurial ventures and investment ventures. And as you allude to being investment ready and so on, I'd love to find out what do you mean by the two and what's the difference.
So this is something we talk about a lot on our team. There are tons of opportunities across the continent and in Ethiopia, but only some of those are really investment ready. And so I think that to give two extreme examples, so there, as everybody here knows, there's an enormous business community, enormous amount of wealth in Ethiopia created around trading, and those are amazing businesses to be in, but they are not great businesses to invest in, and because they are so dependent on the personalities and the principals and the owners of those business for their success. And so it can be very difficult to sell a trading business because once the founder is gone, so much of the value of that business is gone. And that's true for a lot of things that are not as extreme as trading. It's true for anything that, that's dependent on one person, where one person is really critical to the success of the company. On the other hand, you've got investment businesses or investment opportunities where you can create a company, you can create an institution, and those are ones where they're not dependent on one person. Of course, you always have to have the right team, you always have to have the right people, but you can, it's something where you can create value that it can survive any one or two people leaving, and those are really great businesses for investors to invest in. And I think as you think about what you want to do, what you want to create, I think that you can have the same amount of impact and the same amount of wealth creation and the same amount of fun in either of them. But it just is a very different story if you're creating a business that fundamentally will always kind of require you versus one that will, that you can eventually maybe exit or whatever it is.
And so that leads me to my next question. Of when you look at Ethiopia, and if there's people here saying, I want to create businesses that can take investment and grow and they could step out and have an ownership over them. When you look at Ethiopia in the landscape, where do you see those businesses really being available potential?
So, I'm not just saying this, but this is one of the areas where the government has actually more or less, I think, honed in on many of the key ones. I think that manufacturing, processing, kind of those sorts of businesses are ones where you're creating like real value. I think that even, also in the tech space, kind of anything that is, really driven by process, that's really kind of enabled by operational kind of excellence, or a cool idea, or a great brand, I think are ones that you could really attract investors into. I think that ones that are really dependent on how many hours you sleep a night and how hard you're willing to work, how much you're willing to hustle, are the ones that are harder. And that really doesn't mean that you shouldn't do them. It just means that it'll be harder for an outside investor to come in. But I think oftentimes we, kind of in general, the whole world defines entrepreneurship success as getting an outside investor. And I really actually don't think that that's the definition of success. I think, that we should think of a lot more broadly about how, about what it is that you want to do, what it is that you're interested in, and what it is that you're willing to do, kind of to achieve whatever you're trying to achieve, rather than to kind of focus on one or two metrics of kind of cash in or valuation or all of these sorts of things that sound great but actually don't mean that much.
So as you talk about identifying success, from you, back to you personally, how would you define success in your ventures and what you're up to?
Well, I'll say two things. The first thing is entrepreneurship is incredibly hard, and there's an extraordinary chance of failure. And so I actually typically identify success as survival. And I often say that I believe that entrepreneurship is a war of attrition, right? And so whoever survives the longest will win. And I think that we can often get so caught up in these great ideas, this amazing entrepreneurship life, and it's really rewarding. It's great. I'm really excited and proud to have built something, but it was brutal and it was incredibly difficult. And I think that most of the time I was driven by the idea of surviving rather than thriving or rather than winning. And it just so happened that in the course of our being able to survive for this long, that now we've got this great opportunity in front of us and we're ready to seize it. So I think that's for me the number one thing, is it's really about survival. The second thing is that this is kind of a wishy-washy answer, but I think it really depends on what's important to you. So for some, I think what entrepreneurship should be is building a business that you are excited about and proud of, and that you really kind of achieves your goals. For me personally, a lot of that has to do with kind of impact and having impact in society. That a lot of it has to do with kind of ability to affect change and really build something kind of quite transformative. But I think that those can be very different for other people. But I do think it's important to focus on what's important to you rather than what's important, on tech headlines or whatever it is.
And you touch on it briefly, but there is a glamorization of entrepreneurship going on, and not just outside, but now in Africa. And so what's your take on this kind of glamorization of entrepreneurship?
Well, look, I think that entrepreneurship is very cool, and I think it's incredibly important, especially in Ethiopia, especially in Africa. And I think that it is one of the it will be one of the most important parts of building, kind of the Ethiopian future, the African future, the global future. The two caveats that I would say are that I don't think it's the only part, right? I don't think that everybody is meant to be an entrepreneur. I don't think that everybody should be an entrepreneur. We still need kind of good people to run good large businesses and to run, big corporations and to work in public service. And so I don't think that entrepreneurship is kind of the only thing. And then I also think that it's brutal. It's really, really hard. And there are times when it can be very difficult to remember why you're doing it. There can be times when it can be difficult to keep going. In entrepreneurship, especially as a founder, you have a lot of responsibility on your shoulders. And sometimes you put more responsibility on your shoulders than belongs there. But there are times when you're not sure how you're going to make payroll and you don't sleep for days, right? And that sounds like a cool idea. Oh, I don't know how to make payroll, but it's really stressful. And it can really weigh on your relationships, on your personal health, on all these sorts of things. And so what I just would say is that in terms of entrepreneurship, you should go in eyes wide open, right? And so I read this blog once that said, the most important question isn't what you want to do, isn't kind of what drives you. It's what pain are you willing to take. And I thought that was a really interesting way of framing it, because if you are not willing to take kind of this maximum pain and what I call kind of an existential anxiety, a real question of will I survive, will we survive, and maybe entrepreneurship isn't for you, and that's okay.
Mm-hmm. So in the thick of that pain, in the thick of when it's not going your way, what keeps you going?
So I was really, I'm fortunate to have kind of a great set of mentors. Mentors and family and friends, and I think I did not rely enough on my family until too late. Kind of just, I was trying to hide how difficult it was. I was trying to hide my stress, and once I really started to open up to them, that was really, really helpful to me. And I think it's important to have a few people who you trust, family and friends, who you trust kind of 100%. You can be completely open and brutally honest with. I also, as a company, we would not have survived without kind of this one specific mentor, and it's somebody who I met just kind of casually in a social setting. He's, has had a long career in private equity and investing and manufacturing, and we kind of kept in touch and started talking. And he has just this wealth of knowledge. And so one day I sprung on him, hey, will you join my board? And he said yes. Which he immediately forgot, until I sent him the board documents a couple weeks later, and he said, wait, why is my name here? I didn't know I was on your board. I reminded him, and he said, well, that's fine, as long as it doesn't take too much time. And then as things got worse and worse, I started talking to him basically every day. And he was really critical in reading the legal documents, providing advice, being a sounding board, until eventually I roped him in and now he works with us full time. But I think that kind of having a mentor and somebody who can really guide you, who has been there before, is absolutely critical. Because there's no need to start from scratch. All of these are things that have been faced. His first business failed when he was 30. Like he's learned these things. These things are, are out there, and I think it's important to find the people who can really teach you that.
This conversation personally is incredibly fascinating. We're going to open it up to the floor in a moment, so have your questions ready. But before we do that, I would love to hear your advice to anyone who is at an early stage thinking about starting something. They may be in Ethiopia, they may be watching online outside of Ethiopia with a passion to start something in Africa or even in Ethiopia. What would your advice be to them?
Well, the first piece of advice is that you should just assume that it will take much, much longer and be much, much harder than you first think it is. Our original business plan, which I found a couple months ago, had us starting operations, starting construction in mid-2015. It is now late 2017, and we're, I don't know, maybe halfway there. I mean, it's hard to say. So these things take longer. And I think that what that means is that you have to, kind of really make sure that you have a plan for surviving, right? And whether that's, how to make money on the side by doing consulting or getting a second job or whatever it is, not quitting your job up front but quitting later, whatever it is, a plan for surviving. And B, being flexible and open to kind of what the paths take. Again, our original business plan had us having started 3 businesses by now. At some point it became clear that was not really, that we had to choose between Juniper, our glass company, being successful, and kind of following through on that vision. I think we made the right choice by going all in on Juniper, but you have to have that kind of flexibility to react to situations and to do whatever it takes to, again, survive. And I really come back to this idea of survival. If you stay in the game long enough, you will win. You can outlast the competition. You can keep trying until you find the perfect product market fit. But it really is about survival. And I would encourage people to think about how to stay in the game long enough to kind of realize some sort of victory.
Great, that's incredibly encouraging. So, do we have questions from the floor that we can open up for? I'm sure we can hear, so we don't need a roaming mic. But let's see.
Cool.
Yeah.
I was going to be second or third. Two questions. One is, what is one of the biggest challenges that you face when you think of quitting? Why am I doing this? Is it even for me? Like you said, Ethiopia is the most challenging place to do business, and the investment environment is not there yet. So what is that moment for you, and what would your advice be for someone else when they get to that critical point of saying, what the heck am I doing? The other one is, are you doing starting a business from scratch, like you did in the past, or are you investing in companies that are started by local business people, entrepreneurs, and they're just starting for investment?
So for the camera, I'll just say, and for people who didn't hear first, what was that moment? Where was that moment where you felt like just throwing it all in and quitting? What was that challenge? And then the second one was, do you just start businesses up from scratch, like Juniper Glass Company, or do you also invest in companies that are already established on the ground?
Thanks. I'll answer the second question first. We do both. And so we're kind of developers and entrepreneurs, kind of first. But we see opportunities in greenfield, and I don't think we're nearly kind of arrogant enough to think that we have all the good ones. And so we're happy to partner or invest in anybody else's project. What we don't do is we don't just wait around for people to come to us. So what we do every day is come up with new ideas and test those ideas. Whenever a new idea comes, kind of into my inbox, or somebody brings one to us, we absolutely look at it, and we look at it in more or less the same way. But what really distinguishes us is that we're focused on making our own opportunities. Other opportunities can come, but we really make our own. On the first one, I think a lot of the challenges, so for me the hardest challenges came from a couple of external factors. There were numerous glass projects that appeared to be really, really well funded, that were announced or rumored during this period. And we kind of had to decide whether or not we were going to keep going. And then, at various parts of the project, we ran into roadblocks, either related to specific people, to specific institutions, to technical challenges, whatever it is. And that also kind of really called the question of the future of the project into doubt. We're a small company. We don't have a lot of money. We can't compete in the face of, it seems sometimes like we can't compete in the face of overwhelming odds, and we can't compete against, a really well-funded person or company. But what we did, and what somehow we managed to do, is just kind of keep our heads down and stay focused on our goal, and that's, and focus on survival, right? And so, we kind of drowned out the noise, really tried to stay true to what we're trying to do, and then hoping that, everything will work out. It did. It very well might not have, but so I don't know that's great advice, but it worked out for us. I think also, one other thing that I really regret is that I started this alone. And so I didn't really have anybody to rely on. I didn't have anybody to share the burden with. And that was really tough. There were times where I just had too much work. There were times where I was just paralyzed with stress, so I didn't know what decision to make, and I just didn't make a decision. And I really wish that I'd had some help. And that's, also advice that I would give.
What advice would you have for people who are far away from home, whether they're in country away from family or have flown abroad to start a business? What advice would you have from around that?
So I've lived in a different country from where I grew up, and from where my family is for 11 years now. And I think for me, what's really important are two things. So number one, I talk, I use the phone a lot. I chat a lot, and I do think it's important to keep communication, because I think that, as you drift from your core support base, your people, I don't know, I find myself kind of sometimes to be just kind of like listless and uncertain. The second is that I have friends who are like family to me, and I have them here, I have them in Nairobi, I have them all over, and I think that having a real support network, again, people you can really rely on, is really critical, because you cannot do it alone. It's just too scary.
Yeah. At the back there, we've got two questions. Maybe first here and then.
So my first question is, how did you manage to raise the 70 million? Because I know that's a very big hassle. People don't even know that million that you guys started with. And then on a follow-up on that, how did you manage to meet the expectation of the investors? Because I know the investors when they're coming in, they have their own expectations. And sometimes you as an entrepreneur, you also have their own expectations. And to many entrepreneurs, it's always a challenge getting the right investor. How did you go through that hassle?
So first question is, how did you go about raising the 70 million, even though it was the first raise of 30 million? And then the follow-up question was, how do you continue to meet the investors' expectations?
Thanks. So to clarify, we did not start with 30 million. We just started by thinking we needed 30 million. We started with zero. I think what was really important to us is that we immediately set out trying to map what investors would be interested. And so there's some investors who would never, ever do a greenfield investment, ever. And we'd never even approach them. It wasn't worth our time, right? We only focused on investors who we thought would have a fit. And so in the end, we have two major investors. And I'll answer your second question also. We have Console, which is a glass company. And so at this point, I have spoken to every single glass company that has ever thought about investing in Africa. Because those are the ones who are the target investors. We knocked on every single door. We sent cold emails. I met people over LinkedIn. We just kind of, one of our investors, literally, I accidentally sat next to the husband of someone who worked at that company on a flight. Right? And so it's really just about kind of understanding who your target set is and just getting the word out. The other investor is the Development Bank of Ethiopia. And I think that Ethiopia, the DBE, is, they're very clear about what their mission is. They're very clear about what their policies are, right? And we fit into that really quickly. And so we spend a lot of time working with them to come up with, kind of the right solution, the right package, the right focus to make this work. But I think really it's about, finding the investors who you fit with rather than just kind of going to everybody, like really having an idea. And I think that the flip side to that, which is an answer to your second question, is to understand what investors want. And so I think that is in two ways. Number one, there's some things that investors just want to see, right? They want to see a business plan with detailed numbers. If you have anything technical, they want to really understand that you understand the technical side and that you've proven it. For something in manufacturing, ideally, they want you to have made some steps towards getting land, towards getting permits. And these are all things that, fortunately, in Ethiopia, are not outrageously expensive, right? We are in an industrial park or industrial area, not a park, in Debre Birhan, right? And because of the land lease policy, because the government is so much trying to incentivize these things, it actually doesn't cost nearly as much to get land here as it would in Kenya or as it would somewhere else. And so you can kind of have these things that make your project really tangible. To attract investors and to give them a sense that it's real and not just an idea. And the second thing is that we approached our kind of investment conversations as really that, as conversations. So I first spoke to Consol probably in November of 2015. We more or less agreed that we would work together in January or February of 2015. But then we spent 9 months going through all the different investment processes, but also with them meeting our engineers, with us working together to make the investment happen. And so it wasn't a take it or leave it from me. It wasn't a take it or leave it from them. It was really a dialogue, and it was a partnership. And it was a partnership that started even before they put any money in. But I think that was really important for them to put the money in, and that we kind of created a vision, a shared vision together. And rather than kind of either side dictating terms, we really kind of collaborated. I think that was really important towards kind of getting to those bigger numbers that we're talking to. Is you're not going to get it right the first time. You just have to approach it with kind of this idea that you're going to keep trying until you find a solution.
Really good question. Second question,
But it made it sound like you had a miserable 6 years. Have you ever been happy? And if so, what was it that made you happy on this journey?
So the question is, Brooks, have you ever been happy? And over this 6-year journey, throughout the challenges, what have been the joys? What have made you happy?
Thank you, Niraj. I have been happy. So actually coming back to your question, is one, it's what are the things that have kind of kept me going through these hard times, right? And I'll be honest, I'm really excited about what we're doing. And I'm really excited about the vision of this. I'm excited about the impact that we're having, right? And so I'll talk about it now. I go out to the factory site, very often, the construction site. It's a construction site. I have no idea what people are doing there, right? There's a bunch of machines, they're pouring cement, there's people yelling, and it's amazing. I love being at that site. I get so energized by being there, and I get really excited that this is something that I created, I'll be honest, right? And so I think that keeps me going now. Over the past few years, a lot, there have been a million moments of happiness. A lot of them with friends and family. A lot of them with kind of finding one or two things that are important that anchor me. I read a lot. I run when I remember to. And kind of having a couple of anchors and routines, I think really helps kind of keep me optimistic. But I'm also kind of pretty driven by our mission, which I should be because I came up with it. But I'm really excited about the future of Roha, and I see what we're doing, and I see all of the hardship and all the difficulties, of which there are many, as just kind of part of this journey. And so I really thank you for your question, Niraj. I don't want to give the impression that the last few years were miserable, because they weren't. The last few years were hard, but they were also really exciting, and they were really. I've been really happy, and I'm really glad that I did it. And I have literally zero regrets that I chose this path. And at no point along the way did I ever think of, for example, going back to McKinsey. Did I ever think, should I go get a job? And that's because I had this great support network. I think it's because I still managed to do some of the things that were really important to me. Fortunately, they were cheap. And then I think that it's also because I'm really excited about what we're doing, and I can kind of stay focused on the end goal rather than on the day-to-day issues.
Fantastic. I think we've got time for 2 more questions. One there, and then we'll bring it to a close. So
you told us about all the external problems that you had. Have you had any internal problems within your team? And if you have had, how have you handled it?
So we've heard about some of the external problems affecting the company. What have been some of the internal ones, and how have you resolved them?
That's a good question. So yes, we have had internal problems. Well, I'm going to leave aside the many months that I was late paying salaries, right? So we'll just leave that aside, and I'll say I have an amazing team who is incredibly loyal, and I could not have done it without them, right? I think that what can happen a lot of times, though, is that there is a misalignment between what you need as a company at different stages. And so, when I first started off on this, we had a group of advisors, we had a group of interns, we had a group of, kind of sort of things. And that didn't, they didn't necessarily all grow with the company, right? And that can be really challenging because, again, I'm very thankful for these people who are loyal, who stayed by, who really stuck it out, who took a risk. But it can be challenging in two ways. Number one, we're a really technical, we're a manufacturing company. At some point, when you have very little cash, you need to focus on the technical side and on the other side. And then the second is that, there can be a misalignment of expectations, right? The role that people can play about where the company is going, et cetera, kind of what is expected of them and what's expected of me. And I find that those were the challenging times. Now, the good part about this is, again, what I've never had, and I'm really grateful for this, is a question about intent, right? I don't think that anybody has questioned my goodwill, I hope not, but I certainly have not questioned the goodwill of anybody on my team. Even when there's disagreements, even when we had to part ways, which has happened, right? I really don't think that there was ever a question of goodwill, and I think that what's also really important to me is fairness, right? And so, I think there hasn't ever been a case where I felt like I've been treated unfair, and I hope that I've never treated anybody else unfair. And so that's helped us kind of weather the internal challenges. But at the end of the day, it's a business. These businesses are always cash constrained. Apple, has $500 billion of cash, but they're still cash constrained. Ultimately, you're always going to have to do what's right for the business, right? And I think that what's important is that you make those decisions kind of in as fair and a humane and transparent way as possible. And I think that's what we've done.
Great, good question. I think we have time for one more, and then we'll bring it to a close. So. Brilliant. Well, I have a question. With some of the challenges being around access to information and access to talent in places like Ethiopia, how have you found you overcome those challenges?
So on the information side, I actually think that the lack of information can be a real edge for people who are willing to stick it out and find that information. Ethiopia has a wealth of information available. I just today received the book of statistics for Ethiopia that has information on every single possible industry, every single possible area of production, that didn't exist in soft copy 5 years ago. And so one of the things that we did when we first came here is we went and we sat at ERCA and found out what bottle imports were. We went to every single different regional representative office in Addis to figure out what the land policy was in that region. We did all of these things that were very difficult and very frustrating. But at the end of the day, because we did them, we kind of were able to come up with approximate answers, and that there were answers nobody else had. I also think that you can't be too precise. You're never going to get the perfect number. You just need to kind of get a number that makes sense and check it with a couple of benchmarks. And so I wouldn't say over-invest on that, but the information is there, and if you push hard enough, you can find it, and then you have a competitive edge. On talent, I also think that there's plenty of talent here. I think it's about being creative about how you fill the gaps on your team. And so we have a team of people, many of whom have never worked in glass, many of whom have never worked in investing, but who are kind of smart, talented people. And it's about making sure you have the space in your day, in your process, to coach them and to guide them. And then it's also about when you have the opportunity to get like a great person, you just jump at it. And so, we hired a glass operations expert a year earlier than we had planned, because all of a sudden he became available. He reached out on LinkedIn, and I said, sure, fine, we'll hire you, right? And I think it's also just about being kind of a bit flexible about how you fill those gaps and when.
Amazing. I'm sure you'll have a queue of people wanting that access to that book of statistics, I'm sure, after we finish. But I'm sure you would all agree and joining me in thanking Brooks Washington for the amazing insight he's offered us and information. So,
Thank you.
thank you very much, Brooks. That was absolutely brilliant. As we said before, it'll be available online. But otherwise, we'll conclude the conversation here. I'm sure Brooks will be around for talking to people afterwards. But thank you very much. We hope to welcome you back again next month. And there's plenty of snacks and drinks. But from my end, I just want to say thank you for coming. And that's the end of our interview. Thank you. I'm back. We'd also love to hear how you found this evening, so we can improve and grow. So at the back there, we've got just a feedback form. If you would be so kind as to fill it out before leaving. But this space is available to stay for a while, so we just ask that. Thank you.